Breaking news. Ukraine see Russia's 22 Russian attacks in Pokrovsk. It is Thursday, January 29, 2026, and the fortress belt is holding. If you stand with Ukraine, hit that subscribe button right now. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Uriah in the latest podcast by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover, well, the brutal reality of the Pokrovsk front. A front where the number 22 has become this recurring, almost bizarre symbol of resistance. We'll also get into the shock and evolution of Russian infiltration tactics. We're talking soldiers in civilian disguises. And the high-stakes shadow diplomacy happening right now between U.S. envoys and the Kremlin, even as the battles rage.
That's exactly the mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and cut through the fog of war and, look at exactly how Ukraine is managing to hold the line against just overwhelming numbers. This is arguably the most critical sector of the entire front right now.
And we're not just talking about old-school trench warfare here. We've got a stack of reports that uncover how Russian forces are shifting from heavy tanks to, to what you can only describe as Mad Max-style buggies and motorcycles just to cross these kill zones.
It's incredible. And plus, we'll get into the massive technological shift, why Russia is suddenly centralizing its drone warfare into this new 50th Brigade, and how Ukraine is countering with fiber-optic drones that are, they're literally unjammable.
And finally, that huge disconnect between the battlefield and the boardroom. Why are we seeing peace talks with U.S. envoys at the same time we're seeing the highest attrition rates of the entire year?
So let's unpack this. We opened with this number 22. It feels so specific.
Yeah.
Why is that number jumping out at us right now?
It is fascinating because usually war is just chaos, right? The numbers fluctuate wildly based on weather, supply, morale. But if you look at the general staff reports we've been analyzing, it's uncanny.
Yeah.
January 6th, 22 attacks repelled in the Pokrovsk direction.
January 20th, 22 attacks. January 27th, 22 attacks. And now today, January 29th, another 22 attacks crushed.
That's wild. It stops looking like a battle rhythm and starts looking more like a quota, like a spreadsheet somewhere in Moscow is demanding a specific input of violence every single morning.
Exactly. It suggests a highly standardized operational tempo. The Russian central grouping of forces, they're throwing a very specific amount of meat and metal at the Ukrainian lines every single day. We're seeing over 100 combat clashes across the entire front daily, usually between 105 and 119, but Pokrovsk, it accounts for nearly a third of all that intensity.
And despite that standardized grinding pressure of the Ukrainian lines, specifically the 7th Rapid Reaction Corps and the 46th Airmobile Brigade, they're holding. But we need to explain why here. Why Pokrovsk? We've been talking about this city for months. Why is Russia throwing a third of its combat power at this one specific dot on the map?
It all comes down to two things: logistics and geology. Pokrovsk is the gateway. It's the logistical key to the entire Dnipropetrovsk region. If you control the road networks there, you control the supply flow for the whole Eastern Front. But there's a deeper economic reason that often gets overlooked in the daily news cycle.
You're talking about the coal, right?
The coal, specifically the Pokrovsk coal mine. And this isn't just any coal. It's Ukraine's only remaining source of coking coal.
Right. And for those listening who might not be metallurgy experts, coking coal isn't for power plants. You don't burn it to keep the lights on. You need it to make steel.
Precisely. You bake the specific type of coal to create coke, which acts as the fuel and the reducing agent in a blast furnace. It strips the oxygen from iron ore to create molten iron. Without domestic coking coal, Ukraine's steel industry, which is vital for its defense production, for armor, for its economy, it just grinds to a halt.
So if Pokrovsk falls, it's not just a tactical loss of a city. It's a strategic blow to Ukraine's ability to build its own weapons. It's an attack on the sovereign capability of the state itself.
That is why Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi calls this sector operationally difficult. He isn't mincing words. It is the linchpin. Right now, Ukrainian forces are, they're heroic in their defense of the northern parts of Pokrovsk and Mirnorad, but the pressure is just immense.
So the stakes are existential. But what stands out to me in these reports is how the Russians are trying to break through. You mentioned earlier they aren't using the massive tank columns we saw in 2022. The visuals coming out of this front are strange.
The tactics have mutated. We're seeing a shift from what was called the meat grinder to what military analysts are now calling infiltration tactics.
Infiltration usually makes me think of special forces, night vision, silence. But that's not what's happening here, is it?
No. This is brute force infiltration. They're using small infantry groups, 5 to 10 personnel. But the disturbing part, and we have multiple reports on this now, is that they are trying to seep into urban areas like Rodinsky by blending in.
I was reading about that, Russian soldiers wearing civilian clothes.
Yes. Which is a war crime, plain and simple. It's called perfidy, using the protections given to civilians to conduct attacks. They disguise themselves as locals to move covertly through residential zones, trying to set up firing positions behind Ukrainian lines.
That creates a nightmare scenario for the defenders.
Yeah.
You're in a dense urban environment, buildings are half destroyed, there might still be civilians hiding in basements. And now you have to hesitate before you engage a target because it might be a grandmother or it might be a Russian soldier with a grenade launcher.
That hesitation is exactly what the Russians are counting on. It slows down the Ukrainian reaction loop. It forces the defenders to second-guess every single shadow.
And then on the open ground outside the city, it's the complete opposite. It's all about speed. I mentioned Mad Max earlier. We are seeing buggies, ATVs, and motorcycles. It seems so counterintuitive. You're stripping away all the armor in one of the most lethal environments on Earth.
It seems suicidal, but it's a rational adaptation to the environment. The battlefield around Pokrovsk is what we call drone dense. The air is just thick with FTVs. If you take a heavy tank, a T-72 or a T-90 out into the open, it's big, it's slow, and it emits a ton of heat.
The magnet for drones.
It's a huge magnet. So they're trading armor for speed.
Speed is the new armor.
Exactly. They put infantry on motorcycles and dirt bikes, and they try to sprint across the kill zone before a Ukrainian drone operator can lock onto them.
But surely a motorcycle offers zero protection against shrapnel or even small arms fire. If you hit a bump or get close to an artillery round, you're done.
Zero protection. But the Russian calculation is cynical. They're using what they consider disposable infantry, poorly trained reserves, former prisoners, mercenaries. Their job is to trigger the Ukrainian defenses. They send them in on these bikes to reveal where the Ukrainian firing positions are.
So they're bait. Kinetic probes on two wheels.
Precisely. They are bait to expose the Ukrainian locations so that the elite Russian drone operators who are sitting kilometers back can then strike. It creates this awful dilemma for the Ukrainian gunner. Do I shoot the guy on the bike and reveal my position to a Russian Lancet drone, or do I let him get closer?
That is just grim. But Ukraine isn't just sitting there taking it. I saw a report about the 46th Separate Airmobile Brigade having a massive win recently. It seems like when Russia does try to bring in the heavy metal, it goes very poorly for them.
Oh, absolutely. This was a classic combined arms victory. Russia tried a mechanized assault, actually brought out tanks and armored vehicles this time, thinking maybe they could overwhelm the lines, and the 46th Brigade just dismantled them.
The numbers were huge.
They destroyed the tanks, the armored vehicles, and eliminated nearly 60 Russian troops in just a single engagement. It shows that when Ukraine has the ammunition and the coordination, they can stop even the heavy assaults. They've established a multi-kilometer kill zone around Pokrovsk.
Explain the kill zone concept. Is that just a fancy word for a firing range?
It's more of an integrated system. It's not just guys with guns. It's engineers who have mined the approaches, it's artillery zeroed in on the choke points, and it's drone swarms hovering overhead. Anything that enters that zone, whether it's a tank or a motorcycle, gets hit from 3 different directions at once.
Which brings us to the tools they're using to do that hitting. We teased this at the start, the technology war. It feels like every month there's some new evolution, but this 50th Brigade, on the Russian side, it sounds like a major organizational shift.
It is. It's a sign of maturity in their doctrine. For a long time, Russian drone units were fragmented little groups attached to different battalions, often relying on volunteers for gear. Now, they're centralizing. They're creating the 50th Unmanned Systems Brigade.
And this isn't a small squad we're talking about.
No, we are talking about a massive unit of roughly 7,000 personnel. Their sole purpose is to coordinate drone warfare, flying them, repairing them, coordinating strikes. They are moving away from the ad hoc approach to something on an industrial scale. They're using Molniya fixed-wing drones for supply drops and strikes.
But the development that really caught my eye in the reports, and honestly, it sounded like sci-fi at first, is the fiber-optic drone.
This is the most significant tactical countermove we've seen in months.
Okay, let's break this down. I hear fiber optic, and I think of my high-speed internet at home. What is a fiber optic drone doing on a muddy battlefield?
Think about the biggest weakness of a normal drone: radio signals. To fly a drone, you need a radio link between the controller and the drone itself. If the enemy blasts that frequency with noise electronic warfare, or EW, the link breaks, and the drone just falls out of the sky.
And EW is everywhere now. Both sides are jamming everything. It's like trying to have a conversation in a crowded stadium.
Right, but a fiber-optic drone, it unspools a physical wire behind it as it flies. A tiny, incredibly thin glass filament. It's wound up on a spool on the drone, just like fishing line.
So it's literally wired to the controller, like an old-school lethal kite.
Yes, and that changes the physics of the engagement entirely. First, it cannot be jammed. No amount of electronic warfare can stop it because there's no radio signal to intercept. The command goes through the glass wire.
That is terrifyingly smart.
Second, it gives you a pristine, high-definition video feed right up until impact. Usually, with radio drones, the video gets fuzzy as you go lower or further away, but with the fiber optic cable, you have almost infinite bandwidth.
And no radio horizon issues. Usually if a drone goes behind a hill, you lose signal because radio waves travel in straight lines.
Exactly. With a wire, you can fly low, behind hills, into bunkers, and the signal is perfect. It's a major problem that Ukrainian defenders are having to adapt to because their primary shield jamming is useless against these things.
And Ukraine has its own innovations, right? I read they're aiming for 1 million drones in 2026.
That is the goal, and they're getting smarter about logistics. You know, the Pokrovsk highway, it's under constant fire. It's the artery of the defense. So Ukraine is integrating robotic systems, ground drones, to resupply the troops on the zero line.
So instead of risking a soldier to run ammo or water to a trench, you just send a robot.
Exactly. It's a low-profile, unmanned buggy. If it gets blown up, you lose some cash. You don't lose a father, a son, or a trained soldier. In a war of attrition, preserving your experienced personnel is the most important strategic goal Ukraine has. It shows how much they value the lives of their defenders compared to the other side.
Speaking of attrition, the numbers we are seeing from the Russian side are just staggering. I mean, just looking at the report for today, January 29th.
It is grim. On January 29th alone, the General Staff reported that Russia lost approximately 830 troops.
In one day.
In one day, that is nearly a battalion effective wiped out every 24 hours, plus 4 tanks and a Su-34 fighter jet.
A Su-34. That's a multi-million-dollar sophisticated bomber.
Yep.
You don't lose those lightly. That's a huge capability loss.
No, you don't. And if you zoom out, the total Russian personnel losses since the start of the invasion in 2022 are now estimated at over 1.2 million.
1.2 million, that is. It's hard to even wrap your head around that number. That's the population of a major city, like Dallas or Prague, just gone or incapacitated.
It's a demographic catastrophe, but it also highlights the equipment crunch. You asked about the motorcycles earlier. Part of that is tactical, yes, but part of it is that they are running out of armored combat vehicles. They've lost nearly 24,000 armored vehicles since the war began.
Even Russia's massive Soviet stockpiles aren't infinite.
They aren't. Satellite imagery shows the storage yards emptying out, so they're trading blood for ground because they're running out of metal. And to compensate, they're trying to strangle Ukraine's logistics. They've managed to cut the railway line between Kotlin and Udakne.
I looked that up on the map. That forces all Ukrainian supplies onto the T-0406 highway.
Which puts all the eggs in one basket, a basket that is under fire control. And at the same time, Russia is executing what experts call the energy island strategy.
This is targeting the power grid, specifically to mess with the trains.
Exactly. Most of Ukraine's heavy rail logistics are electric. We often forget that. If you can island the grid, cut off electricity to these fortress cities, the electric trains stop. Ukraine has diesel locomotives, but not enough to replace the whole electric fleet. No electricity complicates everything from moving massive artillery shells to powering the field hospitals.
It's a total siege mentality. They're trying to turn the lights off and close the roads. But while this grinding, brutal fighting is happening in the mud of Donetsk, there's a whole other war happening in suits and ties.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the geopolitical picture.
This is the surreal part. While 830 Russians die a day in Pokrovsk, you have U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner meeting with Putin and with Ukrainian officials.
This is just a week ago, right? Around January 22nd.
Correct. And there's a lot of talk about the Trump administration's 20-point plan and land deals. The diplomats are in Davos or lush conference rooms looking at maps and drawing lines, but the disconnect is just massive. While they talk peace, the Kremlin is posturing harder than ever.
Yeah, I saw Dmitry Medvedev, who I feel like is always the one saying the most outrageous things, claiming Novorossiya is Russia.
Right. He's claiming a broad swath of Ukraine is historically Russian. It signals that despite the talks, the Kremlin's core war aims haven't really changed. They still want total control. It's a classic negotiation tactic. Demand everything so you can settle for half.
And there's internal politics in Russia too, right? Elections are coming up in September.
September 2026. The United Russia Putin's party is maneuvering, and Medvedev is actually trying to lead the party list.
The internet troll wants to be the face of the party.
It is ironic, isn't it? But there are reports that the Kremlin is actually worried. They're worried the Russian public is tired of war.
Imagine that. After 1.2 million casualties, people are getting tired.
Exactly. And if you put a super hawk like Medvedev at the top of the ticket, does that alienate the people who just want this to be over? Or does it rally the base? That is the gamble they are weighing.
That is a fascinating dynamic. You have the elite trying to project strength and empire, while the average Russian family is missing a father or a son because of those daily assaults.
And that political clock is ticking just as loud as the tactical clock in Pokrovsk. Putin needs a win before September. That explains the intensity. That explains the 22 attacks a day. They are rushing against their own internal timeline.
Okay, let's bring this all back home. We've covered the tactical shifts, the fiber-optic tech, the horrific losses, and the high-level politics. When you look at the summary of the last few days, those 22 attacks a day, what's the real takeaway for our listener?
The takeaway is resilience. When you hear 22 attacks repelled, don't just hear a number. Realize that 22 times a day, a wave of enemy forces tried to kill Ukrainian defenders, and 22 times a day, the Ukrainians held the line. They're adapting to the motorcycles, they're hunting the infiltrators, and they're holding the fortress belt despite the odds. It's not just holding ground, it's holding the future of the country's entire defense industry.
It really puts the stalemate narrative into perspective. It's not a stalemate at all. It's a daily, high-intensity defense against an enemy that is constantly evolving. I want to leave you all with a thought to chew on. We talked about the numbers. If Russia is burning through over 800 soldiers a day and resorting to disguising troops as civilians just to inch forward a few hundred meters, how sustainable is this offensive, really? Regardless of what the politicians in Moscow or the envoys in Davos claim, can an army actually survive that kind of bleed indefinitely?
That is the question that might decide the entire outcome of 2026.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.